The fleet of the Zareth Confederation drifted in silence, its once glorious warships scarred, flickering with dying energy, and covered in the soot of failed battles. What had started as a proud expedition, 37 vessels, 2 million crew strong, was now reduced to a crippled cluster of half-dead metal, tucked into the cold shadows of a dying moon. Life support was hanging on by wires. Communications were dead. And worst of all, the enemy hadn't even fired the last shot. Captain Thalzek stood near the flickering viewport of the command ship, Vokar 9, staring into nothingness. He had lost too many. Friends, subordinates, even his own mate who served on the medical vessel now reduced to space dust. His long, silver-skinned fingers trembled slightly as he gripped the edge of the console. The Zareth were proud, ancient beings, who believed in war with honor and diplomacy through strength, but strength had failed them here. "We were supposed to return home as heroes," murmured Lieutenant Sara, barely audible through the still air. Her voice had lost the usual confidence. "Now, even our distress signals are floating into silence. We're forgotten." Thalzek didn't reply. What could he say? That hope was still out there? That someone would come? Even the scavengers avoided this part of the system now. Too dangerous, too cursed. The solar flares from the binary stars made most electronics useless. The enemy had seen to that. No weapons, no shields, no propulsion. They weren't just defeated. They were discarded. But then, on the 12th cycle after the last broadcast, a faint blip on one of the surviving deep-range sensors. A distortion in the far edge of the starfield. At first they thought it was debris, or maybe another dying vessel limping through, but it moved differently. Smooth, clean, unburned. "A ship?" Sara said, squinting at the grainy readout. "But there's no ID, no Zareth signal, no enemy signature." "No," Thalzek whispered, stepping closer. "It's not one of ours. It's something else." The ship was small compared to the towering Zareth cruisers. Sleek, silver gray, organic curves unlike the sharp geometric designs of most galactic powers. It didn't match any known military or civilian design from their star maps, but it came straight toward them. Unarmed, shields lowered. "Suicide scout?" one of the younger officers asked, voice quivering. "Or a trick," another hissed. "They're luring us. Let them close and detonate." Yet none of those things happened. The ship slowed, parked itself gently alongside the ruined Vokar 9. Then, calmly and quietly, a message flickered on the still-working screen. A single phrase, in clean, clear galactic common. "Do you need help?" Gasps echoed across the bridge. They speak our language?" Sara stuttered. "How? Who are they?" Thalzek's heart pounded, not from fear, but from something he hadn't felt in weeks, something alien to the battlefield. Hope. He reached for the manual comms, a rusted, rarely used relic, but all they could transmit was rudimentary text. Still, he typed, "Who are you?" The answer came almost instantly. "We are humans, from Earth." Humans. Thalzek's brow furrowed. The name stirred memories. A species barely known, spoken about in rumors. They weren't part of the great alliances. They weren't conquerors or diplomats. They were distant, isolated. Some said they were still stuck in pre-galactic squabbles. Others claimed they had tech that scared even the Centaur Dominion. But none had seen them in battle, and none expected them to show up here, in the middle of a dead zone, beside a fleet that should have been forgotten. Another message blinked. "We saw your distress signal. We're equipped for rescue and repair. Request permission to dock." Sara looked at Thalzek. "Captain?" He didn't respond immediately. He stared at that simple sentence. No threat, no posturing, just an offer. He exhaled slowly. Tell them yes. Permission granted. Moments later, the human vessel attached itself to the emergency airlock, and the hatch hissed open. In stepped the first human Thalzek had ever seen, short compared to the towering Zareth, wearing a simple suit marked only by a symbol, a blue globe encircled by olive branches. Name's Commander Reese, the man said with a calm smile. You folks look like hell. Thalzek blinked at the strange, almost casual tone. Why would you come here? He asked, voice heavy. There's nothing left to save. Reese's smile didn't fade. That's where you're wrong, Captain. We didn't come to destroy. We came to remind you that not all fleets are abandoned. Commander Reese stood firm in the doorway of the Zareth flagship, the stale air hissing around him. Behind him, a small team of humans in matching blue-gray suits waited, eyes alert but relaxed. They didn't bring weapons. Not visibly, at least. Not that they needed to. The Zareth couldn't even power a coffee warmer right now, let alone fire a defense system. Captain Thalzek narrowed his silver eyes, his expression unreadable. The crew around him had gone still, watching this small creature, this human, walk into their tomb of silence like it was just another rescue mission. That calm, almost casual energy baffled them. Nobody treated the Zareth like this. Not anymore. Commander Reese, Thalzek said slowly, testing the name on his tongue. You said you came to help. Do you realize what you're stepping into? I've seen the reports, Reese said, stepping forward slowly, glancing at the fractured consoles and the collapsed ventilation ducts. Zareth Confederation, 3rd Fleet, supposed to be unstoppable, took one hell of a beating out here. Thalzek winced, not from the words, but the truth in them. Reese continued, his voice firm but strangely warm. We tracked your distress signal, saw it pulsing in intervals, barely a whisper through the solar noise. Honestly, we thought it was an old probe at first, but then we found you. You're far from home, Sarah muttered, her eyes narrowed. Earth is on the edge of the Orion sectors. This isn't your war. No, it's not, Reese agreed, glancing at her with a small shrug. And that's exactly why we came. The crew exchanged confused glances. That didn't make sense. No species ever offered help without gain. Aid always came with strings. Political leverage, resource rights, or strategic favors. That was how the galaxy worked. Always had. Thalzek stepped forward, towering over Reese by a full 2 feet. What do you want from us? Reese looked up, calm as ever. Nothing. Nothing, Thalzek echoed, not bothering to hide the skepticism in his voice. We're not here for territory, not here to make a deal. We're here because someone needed help and no one answered, Reese said simply. So we did. That silence returned, thick and heavy. If anyone else had said it, they might have laughed. But this human didn't look like he was joking. Behind Reese, a woman with a close-cropped haircut stepped forward. Her skin was dark, her expression serious. Lieutenant Araya, Engineering Corps. If you'll allow it, we'd like to assess your life support and power systems. We brought portable plasma generators, filtration units, and food. Basic triage. Captain Thalzek hesitated. He should have refused, should have told them to leave, that Zareth pride did not accept charity. That a true captain went down with the ship, not waited around for some monkey species from a forgotten planet to play hero. But when he looked at the faces of his remaining crew, sickly, wounded, defeated, that pride felt like a rusted chain holding them under. He nodded. Do what you must. And just like that, the humans moved, efficient, organized, and fast. Within hours, humming units were installed across the Vokar 9, bringing fresh air, warmth, and stable lighting to corridors that hadn't seen either in weeks. Drones zipped through the decks, scanning for structural damage, while medics tended to the wounded. The humans used small translators clipped to their collars, enabling real-time communication that worked smoother than anything the Zareth had seen. It was unsettling. "You're telling me Earth can field a response crew like this?" Sarah asked one of the medics, a young man with shaggy brown hair named Tobin. He smiled slightly. "We've seen worse than this. Floods, quakes, colony collapses. Humanity learned the hard way. We either show up for each other, or we fall apart." She frowned. "But this isn't your species. We're not human." "No," Tobin agreed, adjusting the scanner on a wounded Zareth's chest. "But we believe in showing up anyway. Sometimes that's all it takes." It struck something inside her. That strange belief. That insane, almost naive hope. The Zareth didn't think like that. They never had. Strength was survival. Allies were tools. And yet, here these humans were, working side by side with what used to be a feared galactic military, offering food and aid like it was just another day at the office. Later, in the command chamber, Thalzek sat with Commander Reese, sharing a rare moment of quiet over rehydrated stew. Zareth cuisine had long turned synthetic, efficient, and tasteless. The human stew, spicy, thick, smoky, was more flavor than he'd had in months. Reese sipped his own drink. "You know, we almost didn't come." Thalzek looked up. "The fleet argued over it, whether to respond, whether it was a trap, whether we were wasting resources on a lost cause. But in the end," Reese stared into the mug, "we figured the galaxy's full of people who look the other way, so we chose not to be one of them." Thalzek didn't respond at first. "I've seen 100 empires rise and fall," he said quietly. "I've seen the proud reduced to pirates, the noble turned tyrants. Even the most righteous lie to themselves in the end." "I don't doubt that," Reese replied. "But we're not trying to be righteous, just decent." Thalzek chuckled bitterly. "Decent doesn't win wars." "No," Reese said, "but maybe it wins peace." The captain stared at him, this odd little creature with too much heart and not enough caution. He should have dismissed him, called him soft, foolish. But something about him, about all of them, was getting under his skin. "You have no fleet," Thalzek said after a moment. "No empire, no claim. But here you are, saving strangers." "We weren't always like this," Reese said. "Humans, we nearly wiped ourselves out. Dozens of times. Nuclear wars, artificial plagues, climate collapse. We had centuries of selfishness, fear, violence." "And yet you survived," Reese nodded. "Barely. But surviving taught us something, that if we keep only looking out for ourselves, the universe will eventually return the favor." They sat in silence for a moment longer. "You're an unusual species," Thalzek finally said. "Soft hearts, sharp minds, dangerous mix." Reese smirked. "That's what they keep telling us." By the end of the next solar cycle, half the Zareth fleet was running on stabilized systems, fed and hydrated, morale rising for the first time in weeks. Several ships had been pulled into a wide tether chain by human drones, slowly stabilizing their orbits to prevent gravitational drift. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Then came the unexpected call. A new vessel entered the sector. Not human, not Zareth, enemy markings, the remnants of the Tarsk Alliance, the ones who had ambushed the Zareth fleet in the first place. A lone war cruiser, scouting perhaps, or maybe hunting for survivors. Zareth alarms blared across the decks, weapons offline, shields dead, communications scrambled. Panic set in. "Get back to your ship," Thalzek snapped at Reese as red lights filled the corridors. "We'll handle this." "With what?" Reese shot back. "You've got no weapons, no engines, no bluff." Thalzek's jaw clenched. He hated the truth in that, hated the powerlessness. Reese tapped his comms. Control, initiate Ghost Protocol, full cloak. Position between Zareth fleet and hostile ship. Thalzek blinked. You have cloaking tech? Better. A refractive field strong enough to bend scans. Outside, the small human ship shimmered, then vanished. A few minutes later, the enemy cruiser appeared on sensors, scanning, waiting. No return signal, no movement from the Zareth fleet. It hovered like a predator over prey, and then it turned and left. No confrontation, no curiosity. Gone. Thalzek stared at the blank screen. They thought we were already dead. Or, Reese said quietly, they thought we weren't alone anymore. 3 solar rotations had passed since the enemy scout ship vanished into the void, and the Zareth fleet had not been attacked since. It was the longest silence they'd had in cycles, and it was beginning to feel like a second chance, but one they didn't quite understand yet. The humans were everywhere now, moving across the shattered decks of once proud ships, repairing junctions, feeding the sick, cleaning air filtration systems that hadn't worked in weeks. They didn't ask for loyalty or command. They didn't plant flags or demand access to weapon systems. They simply helped. And that was exactly what disturbed many of the Zareth crew. Captain, we must consider the implications, said Kirok, a tactical officer who had once served on the Dominion front line. His tall frame was rigid with tension as he stood in the captain's ready room aboard the Vokar 9. They've disabled our shame by making us dependent. That's not rescue. That's conquest through kindness. Captain Thalzek didn't answer right away. He was watching the outside view, a small viewport that now displayed the glint of the human ship idling near the main engineering hull. Even after the cloaking display, they had never activated weapons. They could have taken the crippled Zareth fleet apart like vultures, but they hadn't. Conquest through kindness, Thalzek repeated, more to himself than to Kirok. You think kindness is a tactic? Kirok stiffened. I think it's a strategy. Then it's one we've never mastered. Kirok said nothing. Thalzek turned. I understand your concern, but they've not once asked for access to our databases, not our archives, not our weapons, not our encryption systems. In fact, I believe they're deliberately avoiding them. And that's what should worry us, Kirok said. They're hiding what they truly want. You may leave, officer. Kirok hesitated for a moment, then gave a sharp nod and left. Thalzek sat alone, exhaling slowly, wondering what it meant when the truth felt more dangerous than the enemy. Across the central med bay, Sara walked alongside Lieutenant Araya, the human engineer, both of them moving through the damaged lower deck where civilians had once been kept in stasis. Most of them were awake now, weak, thin, dazed. You've stabilized over 100 cryo-sick survivors, Sara said, her voice filled with reluctant admiration. Even our top medics couldn't wake half of them without neural damage. Araya tapped her data slate. That's because your stasis fluid uses outdated electrolytic regeneration. You were freezing your own people too deep. We swapped in pulse modulation dampeners, bought us an extra 60 seconds of safe revival time. Sarah frowned. Where did you learn all this? You're humans. Araya smirked. We may be soft, but Earth is a chaotic planet. Floods, earthquakes, wars, disease outbreaks. We learned fast or we died. There was something fierce in her voice, underneath the calm. Something earned. We used to think your species was irrelevant, Sara admitted. Primitive, undisciplined. You've never even joined a galactic council. We didn't want to, Araya said without flinching. By the time they offered us a seat, we'd already seen the corruption. The same species that held meetings about peace were funding wars in the back rooms. Earth isn't perfect, but at least we don't pretend. That hit Sara harder than she expected. Meanwhile, back aboard the human ship Solace, Commander Reese was in a private transmission with someone on Earth Command. The signal lagged badly in this sector, but the encrypted feed held strong enough. On screen, a stern-faced woman in a deep blue uniform frowned back at him. "You're exceeding mission scope, Commander." "Am I?" Reese leaned back in his seat. "Because last I checked, the primary order was, respond to all valid distress signals within operational radius. The Zareth fleet sent a signal. We didn't authorize extended humanitarian support, and certainly not entanglement." "They were dying," Reese snapped. 2 million crew, soldiers, engineers, civilians, children. We found a broken fleet and gave them a reason not to drift into the void. If that's entanglement, then I'll take the reprimand." The woman sighed. "This isn't just a dead fleet. It's the Zareth Confederation, an empire with a history of brutality. They've enslaved species, colonized weaker worlds. Do you really believe they deserve saving?" "I'm not saving their history," Reese said, his voice low. "I'm saving their people." Silence stretched across the call. "Continue assistance," the woman finally said, "but no weapons transfers. No shared technology beyond triage and support. And, Commander," he waited, "don't fall for the myth of redemption. Some fleets are better left in ruins." The screen cut out. Reese sat alone, fingers drumming against the desk. It was already too late for that. 2 days later, everything changed. A signal was intercepted by the Zareth sensors, barely detectable. A scrambled message. It had the Tarsk encryption signature, but not the frequency of their battle orders. The humans helped decrypt it. It was a bounty transmission. "The Zareth Confederation fleet is a live, high-value target. Reward for location confirmation, 10 million biocredits. Proof of destruction, 50 million. It was broadcast across black market channels, pirate networks, and bounty guilds. In simple terms, someone had sold them out. Inside the Zareth War Council room, panic erupted. "They know we're alive. We can't move, we can't run. They'll come for the bounty. Even allies might betray us for that sum." Thalzek slammed his hand on the table. "Enough!" Everyone went quiet. Sarah looked at him, her face pale. "What do we do?" Thalzek stared across the room. "We hide." Kirok laughed bitterly. "You want the Third Fleet of the Zareth Confederation to run like dogs?" "I want them to live," Thalzek said quietly. He turned to Reese, who stood silently against the back wall. "You have a cloaking field. Can it cover all our ships?" Reese rubbed his jaw. "Not for long. It wasn't built for fleets this size. We'd need to retrofit every Zareth vessel with temporary field emitters. That takes time." "Then we buy you time," Thalzek said. "Start immediately." No one protested, because for the first time, they believed in being saved. The next 2 solar rotations were chaos, controlled chaos. Human engineers moved between ships, attaching emitters, testing energy dispersals. Zareth engineers worked beside them, pride put aside, learning and adapting. Human medics trained Zareth counterparts in advanced field triage. Zareth techs helped humans recalibrate tools to their ship's strange power systems. They were no longer just being helped. They were becoming something else. Allies. But not everyone approved. On the Vokar 9, deep in the command subdeck, Kirok met with 2 other officers. Quietly. Secretly. "This cannot stand," he hissed. "They make us dependent. They humiliate us. They soften us for conquest." "They've given us life," one officer said. "And in return they take our identity," Kirok snapped. "We are Zareth, not pets of Earth." He activated a small device. A signal burst. Encrypted. Silent. Untraceable. And far away, on a forgotten moon, a pirate fleet stirred. They had received the signal. The Zareth were alive, and defenseless, and the reward was worth the risk. The cloaking emitters were almost finished. Across the crippled remains of the Zareth fleet, every ship had begun to shimmer in and out of visibility as the human engineers fine-tuned the refractive fields. The plan was simple. Blend into the cosmic noise, drift in silence, survive until systems could be rebuilt enough to make a full jump out of the binary dead zone. But time was not their ally, and treachery had already sunk its teeth deep. On the lowest deck of the Vokar 9, Kirok stood alone in the darkness of the gravity stabilizer chamber. The machine hummed around him, a great mechanical heart too old to fail, too stubborn to stop. The room was off-limits to humans, not out of protocol, but because it was considered sacred engineering, part machine, part relic from a time when Zareth ships were built with spiritual precision. Kirok liked it here. The silence, the weight of history. It reminded him of who they were meant to be. He clutched the tiny transmitter in his hand, the one that had signaled the bounty to pirate ears. He didn't regret it. Not yet. The humans will leave once they get what they want, he muttered to himself, and when they do, we must be ready. Above him, chaos brewed quietly. Sarah was running diagnostics with Tobin, the human medic-turned-engineering assistant, checking the structural integrity of the main command tower. She was exhausted, and not just physically. There was a kind of emotional erosion happening to her, one she couldn't explain. It started with their jokes, their casualness, the way they touched everything with their bare hands, talked to Zareth like old friends. They didn't fear rank. They didn't bow. And yet somehow they weren't rude. They weren't arrogant, just honest. And honesty wasn't something she was used to. "You keep staring at the same panel," Tobin said, chewing on a piece of dried protein stick. "Either you're thinking about blowing up the ship or you've got the hots for me." She blinked at him, startled. "I what?" He laughed. "Kidding. Well, mostly, but you've been quiet." "I'm tired," she said simply. "I get it." "All this?" He gestured around the broken tower. "Takes a toll." "It's not the repairs," she murmured. "It's the shift. Something's changing. I don't know if it's you people or us." Tobin leaned back. "Maybe both. Maybe we're changing each other." She looked at him. Really looked. There was no manipulation in his tone. No mask. Just a human saying what he felt. And for the first time in her life, Sarah didn't want to fight it. Meanwhile, aboard the human vessel Solace, Commander Reese reviewed the long-range scans again. Something didn't sit right with him. He'd seen too many ghost zones like this one. Dead sectors, rich in debris and betrayal. The kind of place you could vanish in forever. And the fact that no one had come back to finish the Zareth off? That wasn't mercy. It was planning. "They're waiting," he said under his breath. "They're watching." A ping sounded from the console. Anomaly detected. Unmarked vessel. Outer orbit. Reese stood up so fast he knocked his chair over. He activated comms. "Lieutenant Araya, bring your team in now. All human personnel back to the Solace. Red alert." The ship's AI confirmed the command as emergency lights blinked through the dark corridors. But it was already too late. The first strike hit without warning. A ripple of dark energy, invisible to most sensors, slammed into the outer hull of the Zareth freighter Calveth, splitting it down the middle. It didn't explode. It cracked, as though reality itself had shattered for a second. Fragments of the vessel spun outward, screaming through the void like dying voices. Inside Vokar 9, everyone was thrown to the floor. Alarms screamed, lights flickered. "Status report," Thalzek barked, pulling himself up. "Unmarked vessel just decloaked. It's not Tarsk, it's pirate class, heavily modified. Possibly 3 more on approach." Reese burst onto the bridge, eyes blazing. You've been sold out. Someone inside your fleet signaled them. We traced a transmission burst. Thalzek whipped around. Who? We're still narrowing the source. Another explosion rocked the fleet. Captain! Sarah's voice rang through the channel. They've targeted the emitter relays. They're trying to disable the cloaking net. Reese snapped a command. Solace to all crews. Defensive maneuvers. Protect the relay nodes at all costs. Do not engage unless fired upon. Weapons were still offline. The Zareth fleet had power now, but not teeth. They were sitting ducks unless they got the cloaking field re-established. But the pirates weren't here to destroy everything. They wanted proof. Bodies, hull wreckage, survivor tags, something they could show for the bounty. And that made them even more dangerous, because they'd pick the Zareth apart, piece by piece. In the engine corridors, Araya and 2 human techs were sealing breach points, while Zareth engineers scrambled behind them. This section's failing, one shouted. The emitters are overheating. Divert coolant through the secondary vent line, Araya barked. That will fry the power core. Do it anyway. If we don't mask the fleet, the next shot hits command. They moved fast. Tools, heat seal gel, surge protectors. For 5 agonizing minutes, the corridor became a war zone of sparks and sweat. Then, stability. The emitter blinked green, and across the outer edge of the fleet, the shimmer returned, weak, but enough to confuse tracking. Araya slumped to the floor, soaked in coolant and sweat. We're not dying here, she whispered. On the bridge, Thalzek watched the display flicker. 3 more pirate ships entered range. Reese turned to him. We can't hold this net. They'll find us eventually. We have to move. To where? Thalzek growled. We can't jump. No, but we can drift, Reese said. There's a collapsed dwarf star in Sector 7G. Heavy gravity distortion. If we bury ourselves in its signature, we can hide until your warp stabilizers come back online. That's suicide. It's survival, Reese said, and it's your only shot. Thalzek looked around. His officers, bleeding, exhausted, frightened, waited for his decision. Then he nodded. Do it. Across the fleet, human drones began latching onto Zareth vessels, dragging them slowly toward the edge of the sector. It was an insane plan, hiding in the electromagnetic storm of a dying star, but humans had always thrived on impossible odds. As they drifted, more ships were lost. Kelverin, gone in a silent explosion. Zaraka 4, abandoned mid-drift. Life pods jettisoned, lives gone. But the fleet moved. They reached the gravitational swell of the dwarf star just as the pirates realigned scanners, and by then, nothing was left to find. The fleet was gone, hidden in death's shadow. Later, in the dark of a barely lit bridge, Thalzek sat across from Commander Reese, nursing a cracked rib and 1,000 unspoken thoughts. You could have left us, Thalzek said. I didn't. Why? Reese looked at him. Because someone once pulled us out of the fire. Thalzek leaned back, breathing shallow. We were raised to believe that mercy is weakness. I was raised to believe that indifference is worse. They sat in silence again. Then Thalzek reached across the table, held out his hand. A Zareth's gesture of alliance. Reese looked at it, then shook it without hesitation. You've given us more than survival, Thalzek said. You've given us something we'd forgotten. Reese tilted his head. And what's that? Thalzek answered with a voice heavy from war, but warm for the first time in decades. Hope. They had survived. Barely. The collapsed dwarf star churned like a dying heartbeat in the distance. Its gravity rippling out in waves that distorted sensors and made it impossible to lock onto anything clearly. It was the perfect place to hide a dying fleet. Or lose your mind. Most Zareth crews stayed strapped in their bunks or locked in command decks with sedatives. The storm outside played havoc with their inner balance. Even the humans had begun wearing gravity dampeners and neurological stabilizers. It was a black place, one that twisted light and time, and only desperation could make you stay. But staying alive was still better than being hunted. Even in that grim silence, however, something stirred. Not in the gravity storm, but within. Sarah knew something was wrong the moment she entered the auxiliary comms chamber and saw the security feed blinking red. The room was supposed to be offline, powered down days ago to conserve energy, but the flicker of internal lights and residual heat in the panel told another story. Someone had been here. She tapped her wrist pad and pulled the logs. Unauthorized access. Late cycle. Manual override used. The logs were encrypted in old Zareth encryption. Pre-Reformation. Only someone from high command would know that protocol. Her chest tightened. She pulled up the internal surveillance. The image was grainy, but clear enough. Kirok. Standing over the console, fingers moving fast, face like stone. Sarah's mouth went dry. Reese leaned over the table as Thalzek read the same logs, face unreadable. "Kirok?" the captain said flatly. "He signaled someone," Sarah said. "We traced the spike. It matches the burst the pirates responded to." "It was him. He brought them to us." "He was your second in command," Reese muttered. "That must feel like a knife." Thalzek didn't reply. He stood slowly, spine straightening with the stiffness of a man who'd been through too much to break now. "He betrayed his fleet, his people." "And if we confront him now?" Sarah asked. "He'll say we're siding with humans. He'll say we've been corrupted." "Let him," Thalzek said coldly. "Let everyone hear it." They found Kirok alone in the abandoned observation chamber, watching the swirling, ghostly lights from the dwarf star. The glow lit half his face, casting the other in shadow. "You shouldn't be here," he said without turning around. "I could say the same," Thalzek replied. Kirok turned. "I did what you wouldn't. I sent a message, yes, but it was a call for strength. For Zareth pride. We are not scavengers begging at the feet of lesser species. You sent a death squad to slaughter our survivors." "I called allies to wake us up," Kirok snapped. "We've grown soft, dependent. Humans have infected this fleet with their weakness." Reese stepped forward. "Is mercy weakness to you?" Kirok sneered. "You've built a civilization of sentiment. That's not strength. It's delusion." Thalzek stepped between them. "We were dying. We had no systems, no power, no food. They came when no one else did." Kirok's eyes burned. "And now they stand beside you while you condemn your own? You wear their tech, breathe their filtered air, and think you still lead a Zareth fleet?" There was a silence. Then Thalzek spoke. "I do not lead the fleet I once did. That fleet is gone, burned, abandoned." He took a step closer. "I now lead those who want to live, who want to change. And if that future includes the help of humans, then so be it. You may hate that, Kirok, but you cannot stop it." Kirok's eyes flicked to the side. That was when Reese noticed it, the shimmer in Kirok's hand. A small trigger device. His instincts kicked in. "Gun!" he shouted. Kirok pressed it, but nothing happened. Thalzek didn't flinch. He held up a small chip, stripped from Kirok's quarters earlier that day. "Your failsafe was disabled," Thalzek said quietly. Kirok's mouth opened, closed, then he lunged. Sarah fired first. The pulse shot hit him square in the chest, non-lethal, but enough to drop a mammoth like Kirok. He hit the floor hard, breathing, but defeated. Thalzek turned to Reese. "We'll deal with him." Reese nodded. "No objections here." But he knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Kirok was placed in confinement. The message of his betrayal spread like wildfire, first whispered in corridors, then spoken openly. Many officers had respected him, feared him even. But now they watched the humans with new eyes. These weren't conquerors, they were survivors. And they were helping others survive. Still, the damage had been done. Half the fleet knew now how vulnerable they truly were. If pirates could follow a single message, others could too. It was only a matter of time. Later that night, Rhys stood on the observation deck of Solace, watching the gravity storm churn like an ancient god. His reflection shimmered in the glass, pale and tired. Behind him, Lieutenant Araya walked in slowly. "You're thinking again." "I'm always thinking." "You're thinking about leaving, aren't you?" Rhys hesitated. "Earth Command wants us out. We've done more than we were ordered. Any more and they'll say we're interfering." Araya crossed her arms. "Do you want to leave?" "No." "Then don't." He turned to her. "It's not that simple. We've got orders. We can't just pick sides in a galactic powers civil war." "But this isn't a civil war," she said. "This is a rebirth." He raised an eyebrow. "They're not what they were," she continued. "The Zareth are changing, slowly, ugly as it is, and we're part of that. Or we're the infection." Araya shook her head. "You don't build infection wards. You don't restore medbays and teach emergency first aid to an infection. You do that for people you believe can be saved." Rhys turned back to the storm. "I'm just not sure who we're saving them from anymore. Pirates, enemies, themselves, maybe all three." In the following days, the fleet drifted deeper into the storm. Scanners were blinded, signals died, even light bent strangely. But the repairs were finishing, the cloaking field was holding, internal engines were stabilizing, and in the mess halls and engine rooms, something remarkable began happening. Zareth engineers invited humans to sit with them. Zareth medics asked human doctors for field training. Jokes were shared, names were remembered. They were still wary of each other, but wariness was no longer distance. It was respect. Even Thalzek noticed it. He began holding joint briefings with Rhys. He started issuing fleet-wide bulletins in both languages. And he did something no Zareth commander had ever done. He formally thanked the humans. A recorded message, broadcast on all decks. The Confederation once believed it stood alone in the galaxy, proud, unbending. But in our darkest moment, it was not power that saved us. It was compassion. To our allies from Earth, we owe you our survival, and perhaps our future. But just when hope began to feel real again, the storm broke, literally. A gravitational pulse from the dying dwarf star hit a critical point. The readings spiked across all decks. Rhys stared at the data in horror. "It's going to collapse." Thalzek blinked. "What?" "The star. Its core's destabilizing. That wasn't a dwarf. It's a collapsed nova shell. It's about to go full implosion." "How long?" 6 hours, maybe less." "What happens to us?" "We get turned into light particles." The race began immediately. The fleet's engines were barely functional. Some ships couldn't move on their own. The cloaking emitters had to be jettisoned to redirect power. One by one, the human drones attached themselves to the weakest Zareth ships, preparing for tow. It wasn't fast enough. Power cells overloaded. One ship, the Arvani, caught fire mid-core. Another, Dreketh, lost navigation and veered into a collision course. Thalzek and Rhys coordinated from a shared control deck now, issuing joint orders. "No arguments," Thalzek barked. "Cut Dreketh loose. They'll drag the rest down." "No," Rhys said. "We tow them. They'll blow. We still try." They did, and they succeeded. Barely. The moment the last ship breached the edge of the gravity storm, the Nova remnant collapsed inward. There was no sound, just light, a pulse of it. endless and bright. Then darkness. The storm was gone, and in its place, a calm void, dead but peaceful. Behind them, destruction. Ahead of them, unknown stars. Rhys turned to Thalzek. "Where now?" Thalzek stared out into the dark. "Home," he said. "And when we arrive, the Confederation must change." He looked at Rhys. "And maybe if your people will stand beside us, we can build something better." Rhys smiled slightly. "I think Earth might just be crazy enough to try." They exited the void like phantoms. A broken fleet once thought dead now emerged from the shadow of a dying star, trailing repair drones, patched hulls, and stories no one would believe. To any outside observer, the Zareth Confederation's Third Fleet looked more like a migrating ruin than a military force. But they were alive. More than that, they were reborn. Inside the command chamber of the Vokar 9, Captain Thalzek stood with Commander Rhys, watching the navigation display blink slowly. They were 2 cycles from Zareth Prime, their homeworld. But Thalzek's face wasn't one of joy. It was a storm held behind old eyes. "They won't welcome us," Thalzek muttered, hands behind his back. Rhys raised a brow. "You think they'll punish you for surviving?" Thalzek shook his head. "Not for surviving. For how we survived." "You mean, because humans helped?" "I mean because we allowed ourselves to be helped." Rhys leaned against the console. "They'll have to deal with it. Your people put up monuments to conquest. Maybe now they'll put one up for compassion." Thalzek didn't laugh. He didn't even smirk. Instead, he turned toward the viewport where the stars shimmered like distant eyes. "I once ordered a siege that lasted 3 weeks. We starved out a rebel colony, let them die slow just to prove we could. When I return, they'll remember that Thalzek." Rhys said nothing. He could see the weight in the man's shoulders. Zareth culture was built on dominance. To return home in gratitude rather than glory would be seen as a stain. A dangerous stain. "We'll stand with you," Rhys said after a moment. "Not as conquerors. Not even as friends, if that's too much. Just as witnesses. Maybe the truth needs more than one voice." Thalzek nodded slowly. "Then let's prepare for home." Zareth Prime rose like a storm cloud in the distance. Green oceans, blackened steel cities, and gold banners that shimmered across the equator like veins of pride. Orbiting platforms tracked the fleet immediately. Then, the comms lit up. "Unidentified fleet approaching. State your designation." Thalzek stepped forward. "This is Captain Thalzek of the Vokar 9, 3rd Confederation Fleet, returning from classified operation in Sector B-17. Confirm biometric code Alpha 7 Zareth." There was a long silence. Then another voice came through. Colder. "You are presumed lost in combat. Explain your presence." Rhys glanced at Thalzek. "Direct order," Thalzek said firmly. "Establish orbital lock. Inform the High Council we request audience." Again, silence. Then, "Permission granted. But you are to dock under escort. No weapon systems active. Your human companions will remain aboard their vessel." Rhys's jaw clenched. "They don't want us down there." "They're afraid of what you represent," Thalzek said. "Hope? Change." As the fleet entered orbit, the once proud warships were dwarfed by the towering stations of Zareth Prime. Surveillance crafts flanked the convoy. The human ship Solace was ordered to remain in low orbit, where it would be watched constantly by the planetary defense grid. Commander Rhys watched Thalzek prepare for descent. He'd donned ceremonial armor, scarred, tarnished, and no longer the gleaming gold it had once been, but he wore it proudly. "Be careful down there," Rhys warned. "You're walking into a room full of knives." "I know," Thalzek replied, adjusting his cloak. But I'm not going to beg for forgiveness. I'm going to tell them the truth. Reese hesitated, then extended his hand. Thalzek took it without hesitation. I'll transmit everything, Thalzek added. The data, the video, the logs. I want Earth to have the same history we do. Reese nodded. We'll keep your truth safe. The Great Hall of Zareth High Command was a monument to excess. Tall obsidian spires, crimson banners, a ceiling that shimmered with animated projections of past battles, glory captured in light. Thalzek stood before them now, not as a hero, but as a warning. 17 high counselors sat in silence, robes shining like polished armor. One of them, Counselor Vrennik, leaned forward, eyes narrow. You return from the dead, Captain, and you bring with you stories of failure and of alliance with an alien species known more for emotion than strength. Thalzek did not blink. We were dying. No one came. No allies, no reinforcements, only humans. They nursed you like orphans. They saved us like equals. That silenced the chamber. Counselor Myra, young, sharp, spoke next. You admit this freely? That a Confederation fleet relied on outsiders? I do. You have no shame. I have only truth. Some counselors murmured. Vrennik stood. You've polluted your command. You've endangered our legacy, and worse, you've brought back survivors who may spread this weakness. Thalzek met his gaze. Then let them spread it, gasps echoed. Vrennik's voice rose. You want the Confederation to be ruled by human sentiment? I want it to survive, and to do that, it must learn to evolve. He pulled a small device from his coat and activated the holoscreen. Images blinked into life. The ruined fleet, the storm, the human drones towing crippled ships, Zareth officers working side by side with human medics. Then audio, voices from his crew. We would have died. They taught us more in 2 cycles than we learned in 10. They didn't ask for loyalty. Just let us live. Finally, Thalzek's voice. We were proud, too proud, and in our pride, we almost vanished. When the projection ended, the hall was silent. Then Vrennik's voice cut through again. You return with the arrogance to lecture us? I return with the scars to prove I've seen the end, Thalzek replied, and I'll not let us fall into it again. Vrennik turned to the other counselors. Motion to strip Thalzek of his rank. Effective immediately. But before the others could vote, a new voice interrupted. Counselor Joret, eldest of the circle, rose slowly. No. Eyes turned. Joret's voice was slow, but steady. I was there when Thalzek received his first star. I have watched empires rise on blood and fall on silence, but I have never seen a Zareth captain return from certain death to speak of mercy. Vrennik snarled. He shames us. No, Joret said, louder now. He challenges us. He turned to the others. This fleet returned because of a species we called backward. We now sit in our halls, judging them, while they hover above us, as saviors. A long pause. Then Joret looked directly at Thalzek. Captain, what do you propose? Thalzek exhaled. I propose a treaty, a formal alliance between Earth and Zareth, one not built on weapons but on mutual aid, knowledge exchange, joint operations. We are already working together. Let us do so with honor. Another pause. Then, murmurs of agreement, not loud, not unanimous, but enough. Vrennik seethed. This is a mistake, Joret nodded. So was our arrogance. That night, aboard the Solace, Reese received a message. Zareth High Command has agreed to a preliminary alliance. Human personnel cleared to land under diplomatic status. Joint program discussions to begin within 3 cycles. He read it twice. Then again. He turned to Araya, who was halfway into her second can of nutrient coffee. "You're not going to believe this." She looked up. "We got kicked out?" "We got invited in." She stared. "That's real." "Real enough," she grinned. "I hope you brought your formal boots." On Zareth Prime, the changes came slow, but they came. Human envoys walked the halls of old war academies. Zareth engineers visited Earth's orbital labs. The word mercy stopped being whispered and started being debated. And the Third Fleet? It was renamed, not a military unit, but a bridge, an interspecies fleet with both Zareth and human crew. Sara joined the Transition Command. Araya took over operations for joint engineering. Tobin trained Zareth medics in emotional trauma response. And Thalzek? He stood beside Commander Reese on a platform overlooking a new starport being built by both species. "You know," Reese said, "Earth Command still doesn't trust this." "Nor does half of my own council." Reese chuckled. "Good. Makes it more fun." Thalzek smiled faintly. "I thought we would die in silence," he said. Reese turned to him. "But we didn't." "No," Thalzek replied, "because you came, not to destroy but to save." They watched the stars above begin to shift, and for the first time in living memory, Zareth and human ships flew together, side by side. The joint fleet was now operational. For the first time in Zareth history, their ships were crewed by humans. Their data networks, once sealed behind encryption keys designed to keep out even allied species, were now partially open to Earth's diplomatic channels. A shared language was adopted. A mutual training academy was being built in orbit. It was the future they had dreamed of inside the shadows of a dying star. And for many, that future felt terrifying. Commander Reese stood inside the observation dome of the Unity Station, a floating construct newly approved by both Earth Command and the Zareth High Council. It orbited just above the atmosphere of Zareth Prime, sleek and silver, human design, Zareth engineering. Inside, dozens of diplomats, scientists, and soldiers moved about like ants with purpose. But Reese wasn't focused on them. He was watching the storm. A literal one. Down on Zareth Prime, across the continent of Servanok, civil unrest had broken out, again. Only this time, it wasn't masked behind political protests or budget cuts. It was open rebellion. Zareth ultranationalists, led by an ex-counselor named Vrennik, had formed an underground militia called the Blood Corps, a name chosen to remind people of who they used to be, fierce, sovereign, and unbending. They rejected the Alliance, they rejected Earth, and more than anything, they rejected change. Reese turned when Sara entered the dome, dressed in formal diplomatic attire, still bearing the Zareth crest, but with the interspecies insignia now stitched beneath it. "The protests are spreading," she said grimly. 8 cities. Government buildings occupied in 2. Civil defense forces are holding the lines, but they're holding back," Reese finished. "They don't want to fire on their own." Sara nodded. "Especially when half their own are chanting that Thalzek is a traitor." Reese sighed. "He knew this would come." "He did. He just didn't expect it to come this fast." They both turned back to the viewport, where Unity Station's shadow passed slowly across the planet's surface. "We have a joint fleet, a training program, medical exchange, 100 things worth protecting," Reese said. "And it might all burn because some people can't let go of a flag." Sara was quiet for a moment. Then she said softly, "They're afraid." Reese raised a brow. "They lost everything in that war. The ones who didn't die saw their heroes fall, their doctrines exposed, and now the very people they feared are inside their systems, walking their halls, changing their future." "You say that like it excuses them." "No," she replied, "but it explains them." In the lower deck of the diplomatic bay, Captain Thalzek stood facing a gathering of both human and Zareth officers. The air was tense, not just from the politics on the ground, but from the news that had arrived an hour ago. A bombing. A Zareth vessel, a civilian science ship docked at a joint repair yard, had been destroyed. 14 Zareth engineers, 6 human technicians, gone. The Blood Corps claimed responsibility in a public transmission. "We will cleanse our fleet of foreign rot." Thalzek didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Let me be clear," he said to the mixed crew. "This was not an act of courage. This was a murder, a betrayal of everything the Zareth Confederation stands for now. I spent years believing in dominance, in legacy, but legacy without honor is just rot wrapped in banners." He stepped forward. "And if there are any among you who doubt our mission, who believe unity is weakness, I invite you to leave, not with punishment, with dignity. This is a fleet of choice now, not command." Nobody moved. Not one. Thalzek gave a small nod. "Then we move forward." But forward didn't mean safe. A week later, Unity Station came under a coordinated cyber attack, not by pirates, not even by rogue enemy states, but by Zareth Corps loyalists inside the station's own infrastructure division. Firewalls fell, lights flickered. For 3 hours, the station drifted dangerously close to re-entry range before auxiliary thrusters kicked in. It was an act of terrorism, and it shook every layer of the Alliance. 3 Zareth officers arrested, Reese told Earth Command during a secure transmission. "We've locked down internal comms, disabled long-range outgoing traffic, but if they got this far inside, they'll try again," the Admiral on the other end replied. "They don't want compromise. They want a return to war, but this time they want it with us." Earth Command was torn. Some wanted to pull back, to withdraw and leave the Zareth to resolve their internal conflict. Others wanted to strike hard, crack down, show strength. Reese pushed back against both. "This is the moment that decides everything," he said. "If we run, they win. If we retaliate, we become what they accuse us of. But if we hold, if we stay..." There was a long pause. Then, "You have limited clearance to act. No lethal force unless directly provoked." "And Reese?" "Yeah?" "If you die out there, don't expect a medal. We'll bury the footage and deny the mission." Reese chuckled dryly. "Appreciate the love." Meanwhile, Thalzek met with the remnants of the High Council. Many had resigned under public pressure. Others had gone silent, retreating into private chambers. Only Joret remained vocal. And it was he who pushed through the next move. An open forum. Live broadcast. Zareth Prime, planet-wide, Thalzek and Reese, Zareth and human, together, facing the public. They would not speak to leaders. They would speak to citizens. "We'll be targets," Reese said as they stood backstage before the transmission. "We already are," Thalzek replied. Then the lights came on. The image spread across the planet. 2 figures standing before the golden banners of the Confederation, one alien, one human. Thalzek spoke first. "I do not speak as a war hero, or a counselor. I speak as a captain who nearly watched his people die in silence, in darkness, alone. And it was not our allies, not our history that saved us. It was a species we mocked. It was humans." He paused, letting the words settle. "And they did not ask us to kneel. They asked only that we survive. And we did." Then Reese stepped forward. "I know many of you don't trust us. I wouldn't if the roles were reversed. But we're not here to change your ways. We're here because we believe in something better than fear, better than pride. We believe in second chances." He looked directly into the camera. "You don't have to love us. You don't even have to like us. But if you want your children to grow up in a galaxy not ruled by blood and flags, stand with us." The transmission ended. Later that night, the protest fires on Zareth Prime burned low. Some flags came down, others were burned. But something had shifted. Not peace. Not yet. But doubt. And sometimes doubt is enough to stop a war before it starts. In the weeks that followed, security increased. Background checks were intensified. Ship crews were shuffled. The Blood Corps' influence began to shrink, not because they were hunted, but because they were losing support. The people had seen something on that screen. Not propaganda, but possibility. The first joint exploration mission between Earth and Zareth was approved. A long-range cruiser, half crewed by humans, half by Zareth, was dispatched to chart a region near the abandoned Sithar systems. It was called Unity 1, a name both sides agreed on. Reese stood again at the observation dome as Unity 1 launched, flanked by 2 escort ships built in cooperation between Earth and Zareth engineers. Sarah stood beside him, her arms folded. "You think this sticks?" she asked. "Don't know," he replied. "But we're further than anyone thought we'd get." She smiled. "You really are stubborn. Takes one to know one." She bumped her shoulder into his. "You think Thalzek will retire?" Reese laughed. "He'll die in a command chair." They both watched as the ship vanished into slipspace, a light across the stars. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something that might actually last. 6 months had passed since the launch of Unity 1. And in that time, what had once been an improbable alliance had started to root itself into the structure of both civilizations. Joint science councils had been formed. Cultural exchange programs were operating across 3 systems. The first interspecies children's learning center had opened on Earth's lunar station, taught in both Terran Standard and formal Zareth. And for the first time in known history, no wars were active between major factions. The galaxy was holding its breath, unsure of whether this fragile cooperation was a pause before collapse or the real beginning of something greater. But peace is never silent for long. The message came encoded in an old pirate cipher, intercepted by Earth's deep space listening posts. The words were chilling, even stripped of dramatics. "They're not gone. They're waiting in the dark. Unity 1 has vanished. No debris, no signal. Only a voice left behind. Human, screaming." Commander Reese sat frozen at the command table inside Unity Station, watching the transmission again. It was only 6 seconds long. 6 seconds of scrambled static before a woman's voice screamed in what sounded like pain, maybe terror. Then silence. Lieutenant Araya stood beside him, face pale. "We've pinged all available frequencies," she said. "Emergency beacons, warp space pulses, nothing. Unity 1 is gone." "And you're sure the signal was real?" Reese asked. Araya nodded. "Authenticated. Came from their last known coordinates." He looked over to Sarah, seated beside him. She had barely blinked since the message arrived. "That was Zareth territory," she said quietly. "Unmapped space, but still ours. We guaranteed their safety." Thalzek entered then, slower than usual. His presence still commanded attention, though his face had aged since the first joint mission. The scars on his cheek had faded to silver lines. The once ornamental armor now carried the scuffs of wear, of work. "I've seen that signal before," he said without greeting. Reese turned. "What do you mean?" Thalzek stepped up to the console, tapped into the archive, and pulled up a classified file. A mission from years ago, one that never made it into the public logs. Project Thrak 9. A Zareth Black Ops operation into what they had called the Dead Crescent, a sector of space so hostile, so strange, They declared it off limits for all travel. According to the log, the mission had encountered an anomaly. Not pirates, not a solar hazard. Something else. A presence that unmade ships. No explanation, just static, ghosted scans and terrified voice fragments. Sounded nearly identical to the Unity 1 distress call. "You never told us about this," Reese said. Thalzek's jaw clenched. "Because the Council buried it, said it would spark panic. We closed the Crescent permanently." Sarah stood, angry now. "But you approved the Unity 1 expedition." "I thought we were going around the edge of it," Thalzek said. "The route they filed was not into the heart." "But the ship drifted," Araya said. "Slight course miscalculation. The warp field may have destabilized from interference." Reese exhaled slowly. "So we sent the best of both species into a sector haunted by something we don't understand." Thalzek looked at him. "We need to go after them." Reese raised a brow. "You want to follow the same route?" "We owe them that." The mission was approved within hours. Reese would lead a mixed retrieval squad aboard the Solace, with Sarah as co-commander. Thalzek, now officially retired from Field Command, volunteered to join, but under Earth Command's protest, his request was denied. They wanted younger minds, they said. New blood for a new world. Thalzek didn't argue, but he did give Reese something before departure. A small metal chip. Black, thin, engraved with the Zareth war symbol. "What is it?" Reese asked. "A last resort," Thalzek said. "It activates a pulse weapon I designed a long time ago. It won't save you, but it might end whatever's out there." Reese looked at the tiny device. "This from the guy who gave a speech about peace." Thalzek smiled thinly. "Peace is what we build. But we still carry hammers." The Solace jumped into the dead crescent with minimal ceremony. The space was wrong. That was the only way to describe it. Colors bent where they shouldn't. Stars flickered without rhythm. Time felt slower in some parts of the ship, faster in others. And then, the first sign. A fragment of Unity 1's hull. Floating, cleanly sliced, as if the ship had been cut by light. "No debris field," Sarah muttered. "Whatever happened, it wasn't an explosion." More fragments appeared. Strangely intact, not burned, not torn, just separated. Reese tapped his comm. "All hands, prepare for unknown contact." Then the lights dimmed. From the shadows of deep space, they emerged. Not ships, not life forms, shapes. Dark, angular, shifting things that moved like thoughts rather than objects. And when they got closer, the ship itself screamed. Not alarms, not warning systems. The actual walls groaned, as if the hull was remembering something it had never experienced. Reese and Sarah stood frozen at the viewport. "I've never seen anything like this," Reese breathed. "I don't think anyone has," Sarah replied. Then came the signal, through the static, broken, barely readable. "We are here." Reese stepped back. "They're trying to talk." "Or mimic," Sarah said. "What if it's not language? What if it's bait?" But it was too late. The Solace was already being pulled. Not physically, mentally. Crew started collapsing, screaming, blood from their noses. Some tried to open airlocks. Others wept uncontrollably. Reese reached for the black chip Thalzek had given him. "You think this'll work?" Sarah asked, her hands gripping the rail. "No idea," he replied. He activated it. The ship pulsed once, like a dying heart, and the darkness screamed. That's the only word that fit, a sound so loud and deep it didn't enter through the ears. It clawed its way into the soul. Then, silence. The dark things vanished, just like that. And from the shadows, drifted a pod. One life form inside. Human, barely alive. Back on Unity Station, the survivor from Unity 1 was identified as Mira Chen, Navigation Officer. She could barely speak. But when she did, her words chilled the room. They weren't enemies. They weren't life forms. They were memory, weapons, made from trauma. Zareth guilt, human grief. The unity between us triggered something. We woke them. They wanted to show us ourselves. Then she passed out again. The council convened an emergency session. Some demanded an end to all interspecies operations. Others wanted war declared on the anomaly. Earth Command considered pulling all humans from Zareth space. But Thalzek stood before them once more. Tired, scarred, but unbroken. "We've stared into a mirror," he said, "and it screamed. So what do we do? Smash the mirror? Or change what it shows?" Reese stood beside him. "This wasn't an enemy," he said. "It was a test, a warning, not to separate us, but to make sure we're worthy of being together." And this time, they listened. Months later, peace remained. No more anomalies, no more attacks. Unity 1 was rebuilt. Named Phoenix Unity, Reese was promoted. Sarah led the first civilian delegation to Earth. And Thalzek, he faded into retirement. But stories of him, of the war hero turned peacemaker, spread across both worlds. He died years later, alone, in his garden. But when he passed, they buried him under a monument that bore a single inscription. He taught us that survival is not strength. Survival is mercy.